Welcome, Shannon. Thanks for so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Sally. Glad to be here.
All right, so this is important stuff, but pretty dry. I mean, I work in education, and like when I try and read these updates in the paper, I'm like, what is going on? So I'm really glad you're here to help out. So today we're talking about legislative changes that will affect families paying for college. And I mean, I think I certainly assumed that that big change was going to have to do with, change of administration, Trump to Biden, Republican to Democrat. But actually, that's not the case because a lot of this started at the end of December, right? There was a huge change to the federal financial aid process. So
Yeah, there was a huge bill that passed at the end of December, which included it's like a 5,000-page Consolidated Appropriations Act. But within those 5,000 pages was about 200 pages that they called the FAFSA Simplification Act, which made a tremendous amount of big changes to the FAFSA that are all due to take into effect for the 23-24 school year. So we still got a couple years to go on that. But the biggest thing they did was try to simplify the form. Any big complicated form is a barrier to college access. So they wanted to really trim the FAFSA down. So they cut it down from the current 108 questions all the way down to 36 questions. So the FAFSA is going to be a lot easier to fill out in the future.
that is pretty exciting. I filled out a FAFSA when I was applying to graduate school, and that was a scary form to me. So
it is a scary form. It should be a little less scary.
Yeah. All right. So what are some of the big questions that they cut? Like, what's the information that isn't going to be asked now?
Yeah, they cut a few questions, one having to do with selective service requirements. So males over the age of 18 were required to be registered for the draft. And if they weren't, they could not receive federal aid. That question's gone. There's a question about minor drug convictions. If you had a minor drug conviction while you were receiving federal aid, that prevented you from receiving federal aid in the future. That is gone. So those things won't affect aid eligibility anymore. They cut a whole bunch of questions in regards to forms of untaxed income that you might have had. Most commonly are the things that will affect, I think, the most people. And we are still awaiting guidance from the Department of Education on this. So there's more guidance to come. They can interpret things differently than me, just to throw that out there. But what it's looking like is that contributions you make to your 401k at work will no longer be counted as part of your income. So that's nice for families who are contributing to their 401k.
Mm-hmm.
Another big one for some families, currently gifts or bills paid on a student's behalf count as student untaxed income. That question is going away. That particularly affects divorced families where a non-custodial parent is paying for the student's college. Those non-custodial payments currently count as student income and kind of come back to bite families in the financial aid process. But that question is going away. So it's schools that just use the FAFSA to award their financial aid, which is not all schools, but at most schools, those non-custodial parent contributions will no longer affect financial aid eligibility.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And then, so it sounds like that change could potentially really help divorced families. Any other benefits to them?
Yeah, so another nice thing for divorced families is the way that child support is going to be looked at on the financial aid application. Currently counts as income and income to the custodial parent. If the non-custodial parent is paying child support to the custodial parent, it counts as part of that parent's income, decreasing financial aid eligibility. They're going to start counting it as, they're still going to count it, but as an asset instead of income. Assets have a much gentler treatment in the financial aid formula, so that can also help divorced families. And then another change may or may not help divorced families. I would guess in most cases, not as much. They're changing who is considered the custodial parent. So currently, the parent that you live with the most is considered your custodial parent for financial aid purposes. That is going to change to the parent who provides more financial support. And we are still awaiting a whole lot of guidance from the Department of Education on how exactly they're going to define financial support. So there's more to come there that we don't know yet, but That could be a bad thing for divorced families if you assume that the parent who provides more support is probably the parent that has the higher income.
Mm-hmm.
That could be bad for families in this situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, all right. So that's pretty much of a mixed bag for
Yeah.
divorced families. Some good, maybe some bad. Is there anybody who really lost big under this FAFSA simplification?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of groups of folks. One would be small business owners. Under the current FAFSA rules, businesses that have less than 100 employees and that are at least 50% family owned are excluded from the financial aid calculations. You don't have to report those small family owned businesses as an asset on your FAFSA. Same thing with small family owned farms. They're not looked at on the FAFSA. That exclusion is going away. So you will now have to report all businesses that parents or students own, as well as all farms. So that could hurt those kind of small business owners compared to what's happening now. The other big loser, unfortunately, is families that may have multiple kids enrolled in college at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Currently, the expected family contribution that's determined when you complete a FAFSA, it's split between all the kids that you have enrolled in college. That splitting is going away in the new federal financial aid formula. Meaning you could end up paying, if your contribution is calculated to be, $30,000 when your first child goes in, your second child goes in, you also have a $30,000 contribution for them. So you could end up, paying double. So that could be really rough. That is for federal financial aid purposes only. It remains to be seen how colleges are going to react in terms of their own institutional aid. They can, if they want to, keep splitting the contribution for institutional aid purposes, but we just don't know yet what they're going to do.
I'm just curious what the reasoning is behind that. If families have 30,000 to spend in a given year, they don't, just because they have two kids, suddenly have 60,000.
Yeah. The reasoning is that it is in order to be more equitable to families that have spaced their kids farther apart. Because you can imagine with that $30,000 contribution, let's say, if you have kids spaced far apart, your first one goes with a $30,000 contribution each year, and then the younger child also goes, you still have the same $30,000 contribution for them. So you do end up paying, if you actually paid your contribution, that whatever it was, 120,000 for the first child, 120 for the second, 240 total.
Mm-hmm.
You end up paying double if your kids are spaced far apart, but if they're in college at the same time, you benefit from the splitting.
Mm-hmm.
The thought was that is inequitable that some families benefit and some families don't based on when you had your kids. So they just decided to make it to be equitable. Nobody benefits. Nobody gets the benefit.
Right. Yeah. You all lose.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, it sounds like in other ways things are better. So just not in this one.
Right. Exactly.
All right. Any other big changes we should know about with the FAFSA Simplification Act?
Yeah, so we've been talking about the expected family contribution, just to note that terminology is going away. They're not going to call the number your expected family contribution anymore. They felt like that term was misleading because many people actually have to pay more than their expected contribution. They are changing it to the student aid index, which is, I don't know if it's leading one way or not. It's not misleading. I don't know if it makes any sense to anyone, but it's at least not misleading anymore. So you'll start to hear the term student aid index. The other very nice thing that's happening is they are going to begin basing Pell Grant eligibility, which is a federal grant for relatively low income families. They are going to, the way it currently works is that it's based on your expected family contribution. So you have to apply to college, be accepted, apply for financial aid, go through that whole process till you find out your expected contribution and therefore your Pell Grant eligibility. They are going to create a simple table where Pell Grant eligibility is based just on your adjusted gross income and your household size, so that families can know right up front before ever applying to college that they will be eligible for a Pell Grant. This is the grants, it's about $6,000 in terms of the maximum. So, if you per year, if you qualify for this, you could go to community college for free. Essentially, your Pell Grant would cover everything. So that is a great thing for families to know up front, and for students to know that they can, in fact, go to college, that it could be free for them. So they're going to create this table so that families can know up front what their Pell Grant eligibility will be, as a way to increase transparency and hopefully increase college access.
Well, that seems like a very good thing.
Yes.
I am very pleased about that.
Yes.
All right. So all of this FAFSA simplification stuff happened before the new administration came in January. So anything since then?
Yeah, so one of the very first things that President Biden did I think it was his first day in office, he issued a bunch of executive orders, one of which was extending the current forbearance on student loans. Currently, if you have federal student loans, they are in a forbearance. You don't have to be making payments. This has been the case since for about a year now, since last March, when the pandemic hit, and of course the economy kind of went crazy and lots of people lost their jobs. The federal student loans have been in a forbearance where you don't have to pay. They are not accruing interest. That forbearance was scheduled to end at the end of January. And so President Biden, in his first day in office, extended that forbearance until the end of September. So we've got, so student loan borrowers have more time now to hopefully, kind of get themselves back on their feet economically before they have to start paying back their student loans. We don't know if it will be extended any further, but right now it's through the end of September.
Okay. So this is a totally unfair question that you're completely allowed to say, I have no idea, Sally, but I know people are thinking it because I am. Any hint about loan forgiveness? Any hints about those? Or is it still debate at this point?
It's still debate at this point. I will tell you, in the last stimulus bill that just passed in the past few weeks, where folks got new COVID relief checks, within that stimulus bill, they did not pass any student loan forgiveness. But what they did do was there's a provision in there that made any student loan forgiveness issued over the next 4 years, making it tax-free. So that is sort of thought to be kind of paving the way for a more large-scale forgiveness program. We don't know yet if that is going to happen. It's certainly on the minds of a lot of people and a legislative priority of a lot of people, but there's a lot of kind of hurdles to still jump over before that can happen. I think it's kind of more likely to happen now than in any point in time in recent memory, with Democrat in the White House and a democratically controlled Congress. But there is still a lot of disagreement, even among the Democrats, about what student loan forgiveness, if it should happen, what it should look like. The more progressive members of Congress are pushing for $50,000 of kind of across the board student loan forgiveness, and they want President Biden to do that by executive order, basically on his own, because it will be difficult, if not impossible, to get that through Congress. And they believe he can do that on his own by executive order. That's what some of the progressive members of Congress, Elizabeth Warren, Chuck Schumer, are pushing for that. President Biden has said that he would be in favor of $10,000 of student loan forgiveness, but he doesn't want to do it by executive order. He wants Congress to pass it. So each side is kind of talking. I say each side, they're all Democrats, but they're each side they want the other group to do it. And so there's still a lot that needs to be worked out there. I think there's more support for student loan forgiveness now, and more kind of imperative to do it than there has ever been, but there's still a lot to be worked out. So that still remains to be seen.
Okay. All right. That's kind of around what I thought was happening, but just wanted to make sure I hadn't missed anything. No. So, yeah. All right, so what about the latest stimulus bill that just passed? Did that do anything for higher ed?
So that's where the tax-free provision was. So
Mhm.
if any student loan forgiveness happens over the next 4 years, it will be tax-free. That was in the last stimulus bill. And they also issued about $40 billion in relief funding to colleges. So that is a nice thing for currently enrolled college students, that colleges will be getting a whole lot of money to do all sorts of things on campus, including there's a certain percentage of the money that has to go towards emergency grants to students who are struggling because of COVID.
Mhm.
So it's putting more money in the colleges that they can use to help fund students that might need some help. So that's a nice thing for students. So those were the two kind of big higher ed related provisions that were in this latest bill.
Great. All right, so that's what's happened so far. Anything else on the horizon? I mean, I guess like anything else we should know about?
Yeah, so I think student loan forgiveness is the biggest one that there's lots of talk about right now within the government. So again, remains to be seen how that will play out. The other thing that I would mention is that it was part of President Biden's platform to make college tuition free to one extent or another. He campaigned on a part of his platform was making community college completely tuition free for everyone. Also making four-year public colleges tuition free for families making under $125,000 a year. That was part of his platform. There has been no progress on that so far. It's gotten sort of less attention, I think, than the student loan forgiveness part. That's just another thing that remains to be seen. He did campaign on that platform. What will happen, we don't quite know yet. Because that can't be done by executive order. That will certainly take an act of Congress. And while the Democrats sort of have control, they have 50% majority. They don't have the 2/3 that they need to get some stuff through the Senate. So that will be a challenge.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. We got to wrap it up now. Thank you so much, Shannon.
You're so welcome.
All right. So thanks so much also to Barbara and Kira. And everybody should get ready for our show next week. We're going to have the very timely episode about deciding which college to attend now that you've received some offers of admission. And finally, I want to remind you that you don't have to listen to our shows live. Every show is accessible 24/7 on the Voice America website. And if you want to search for a particular show topic, you can go to our blog page at blog.getintocollege.com. Last, don't forget, we're here every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific.